The Nayankara system. Nayankara system is the most important characteristic of Vijayanagar Empire's provincial administration. This system is considered to be similar to the Ikta system which was practiced by the Delhi Sultanate kings. According to this system, the king owned the complete land. He distributed the lands to his generals who were usually military chiefs or military officers. In this video, let's try to understand how this Nayankara system worked. The king would choose military chiefs or officers who offer extraordinary service to the king and to the kingdom. These military officers were called as Nayakas. These Nayakas were given territories or land to govern. This land was called as Amaram. So these Nayakas were also called as Amara Nayakas. Amarams are generally areas of revenue producing land. So these Nayakas would generate revenue from these territories by collecting taxes and dues from the farmers, traders, and craftsmen. Whatever revenue they generate, half of it was given to the central administration or to the central government, that is to the king. With the remaining half, the main duty of these Nayakas is to maintain contingents of army. They would maintain army, horses, and elephants. This is done to provide Vijayanagar rulers with army in case of any external threat. Apart from maintaining contingents of armies, these Nayakas would also maintain temples within their province, like collecting taxes from the temples or organizing festivals. They would also facilitate or improve the irrigation works within their territories, like the constructions of canals, dams, or wells or reservoirs were taken up. And of course, some part of it was kept for their personal use. These Nayakas would also give tributes to the king in the form of gifts annually. Fernão Nunes, who was a Portuguese traveller who visited Vijayanagar Empire during the Tuluva king Achyutadevaraya's period, in his works he mentioned that the Nayakas they distributed the land to tenants for cultivation or for agriculture purposes, and they would collect 1/10 of the revenue as land tax and never bestowed any sympathy on these tenants. Noon is also mentioned that there were about 200 Nayakas in the empire at that time, and half of the revenue was to be given to the kings. Domingo Pace, another Portuguese traveller who visited Vijayanagar Empire during Sri Krishnadevaraya's period, mentioned that the king would decide the number of contingents a Nayaka should maintain, and he would decide this depending on the revenue that is produced from the province. The Nayakas were appointed by kings, but eventually we get to see that this position has become hereditary, especially when the kings at the center were weak. The Nayakas of Vijayanagar Empire had a power to issue coins in the name of the king. These Nayakas would maintain two officers or two agents in the capital city. One agent is the officer in charge of the army in the capital, while the other is to represent the civil issues and the interests of the Nayaka. The officer in charge of the army in the capital was called as Senapati, while the other is called as Sthanapati. Let us now look at the advantages of this Nayankara system. Nayankara system flourished in Vijayanagar Empire. The presence of this system led to a sound and effective provincial administration. The Nayakas, who were given territories to govern, formed new settlements in certain areas, due to which agriculture was increased and hence irrigation facilities were improved in those areas. And so they could generate more revenue from these territories. Employment opportunities were also increased and people lived a comfortable life. Temples were well maintained, which led to the preserving of Hindu cultures and traditions. Let's now look at the disadvantages. Many Nayakas submitted to the authority of the kings of Vijayanagara, but often these Nayakas rebelled. And when the king at the center was strong, he can subdue these Nayakas by military actions against them. So, to avoid such dangers, the rulers usually established greater control over the trading activities, especially over the coastal trade, like the trading of horses. These horses were usually imported either from Portuguese or from Arab countries. The kings paid high amounts for the best quality or swift horses. The Nayakas, who maintained contingents of armies, had powers in their hands which gave them freedom to have local wars, which in turn led to the mutual disputes among the Nayakas. When the king at the center was weak, the Nayakas who rebelled had power to declare their independence. This eventually weakened the system, and this is the main reason to the decline of Vijayanagar Empire. Let us now look at the viewpoint of different historians. Sri Krishnaswamy Iyengar considers the Nayankara system as feudal, like in European countries. What is feudal? Feudalism is a system which existed in European countries from around 10th to 13th centuries. And according to this system, the land which was owned by the lord, he distributes the land to his generals, whom they call as vassals. But according to Sri Venkataramanaya, the important features of European feudalism like fealty and homage were absent in Nayaka system of Vijayanagaram. What is fealty? Fealty means a promise or an oath taken by the vassal to not harm his lord and not do any damage to his property. And homage is kind of a ceremony in which the vassal pledges submission to his lord. Now, clearly, these were absent in the Nayankara system because we often get to see that the Nayakas rebel against the king of Vijayanagara. According to Sri D.C. Sarkar and Sri T.V. Mahalingam, the Nayakas were kind of landlords where the land was allotted to them by the king for their military services and contributions. Sri K. Neelakanta Shastri, he initially drew a distinction that the Nayakas before 1565 and Nayakas after 1565 were different. What is it about 1565? 1565 is that year when the Battle of Talikota occurred. This Battle of Talikota is considered to mark the end of the glory of Vijayanagar Empire. Now, according to Sri K. Neelakanta Shastri, the Nayakas before the Battle of Talikota were more loyal and more dependent on rulers, while the Nayakas after the Battle of Talikota were semi-independent, or many of them tried to declare their independence from Vijayanagar rulers. He later modified his views by pointing out that Nayakas before the year 1565 were military chiefs. They were given territories for military services to govern, and these Nayakas' duty was to maintain military contingents. Now, according to Neelakanta Shastri, Vijayanagar Empire is nothing but a military confederation of the territories which were governed by the military officers, and the powerful one among them was sitting at the center as the king of Vijayanagara. Now, whatever may be the viewpoint of different historians, it is important for us to understand that Nayankara system was the backbone of the sound and most effective provincial administration of Vijayanagar Empire, especially when the king at the center was strong. Nayankara system flourished much more during Sri Krishna Devaraya's period, and we know that Sri Krishna Devaraya was the most powerful ruler of Vijayanagar Empire.